नमस्कार दोस्तों, स्वागत है आपका आज के मेरे YouTube चैनल में। एंड आज के वीडियो में आई एम गोइंग टू डिस्कस टुडे अबाउट फंडिंग ऑप्शंस। यस, यू हर्ड इट राइट। आई एम गोइंग टू डिस्कस टुडे अबाउट फंडिंग ऑप्शंस। है ना बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक। नाउ लेट्स सी व्हाट आर फंडिंग ऑप्शंस। Many times as a budding entrepreneur or maybe as an entrepreneur, you have a lot of very good business ideas. But what you lack is you lack funds. And without the funds, your business can never take off. This is the 90% case story. So what do these entrepreneurs who have very unique and who have very remarkable business ideas need? They need funds. Someone who can provide them funds. Now who that someone is and what is the pro and the cons of that someone is that we are going to discuss today in our class. We commonly call it as project funding. Okay. Whenever a new project is trying to be opened, that is the financing it is known as project funding. There are two kinds of projects, namely brown projects and greenfield projects. You must have heard it. Whenever the term project financing comes into picture, there is always brown and greenfield projects. Now what is that? A greenfield project is a new project in which everything starts from the scratch. Whereas on the other hand, the brown project is a project which is an existing one, where you have met certain stage and now you are stuck in middle because of lack of funds and you need further fuel of funds to further push it up. So that is the difference between green projects and brown projects. In greenfield projects and brown projects, both of them require funds. So where will that fund come from is one of the questions. As we commonly know that out of many sources of funds, we generally divide it into two categories, namely debt and equity. Debt has a fixed rate of interest obligation to it. No matter you are making profit or you are making loss, you have to pay the debt. And there is no dilution of control over the shares of the company. This is the biggest advantage of procuring funds through debt. On the other hand comes equity. You may bring an IPO. If your company, nowadays many IPO is coming and they're getting oversubscribed big time. So what they need? They need funds. Someone needs funds for expansion. Some of them may need funds for the working capital requirement. So you have to see why these funds are required and accordingly you can raise funds from that particular source of finance. The project financing has number of steps. Before project funding, there are three stages. Number one, we call it as pre-financing stage, and number two, we call it financing stage, and number third is known as post-financing stage. I again repeat, pre-financing stage, financing stage and post-financing stage, right? What happens in pre-financing stage? What happens in financing stage and what happens in post-financing stage is what we have to read. If we procure funds, before that let me discuss something in general. From bank or a financial institution, normally banks or financial institutions lend the money typically from 3 to 10 years, right? Wherein a fixed rate of interest obligation arises. Also, the banks attach certain covenants to that particular agreement. Now what these term covenants are? We many times when we go for loans, we hear the term covenants. But what are these? Covenants are the restrictive conditions imposed whenever you go for borrowing the money. There may be many restrictions. Also, whenever you go for loan, you have to pledge your assets as a collateral with the bank, because no bank gives such a big amount of funds without any collateral or without any asset as a security, right? So let me come to my three stages. Number one, pre-financing stage. Okay, pre-financing stage. Hello guys, welcome back. Now what is comes in pre-financing stage? Number one, first of all, project needs to be identified. आप जिस भी प्रोजेक्ट में पैसा लगाना चाहते हैं, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि सबसे पहले आपको पता हो दैट प्रोजेक्ट शुड बी डिटरमिन कि ये पर्टिकुलर प्रोजेक्ट है फॉर विच आई नीड द फंड्स. सो फर्स्ट स्टेप इज प्रोजेक्ट आइडेंटिफिकेशन. नंबर टू, risk identification. After having identified the projects, what needs to be identified is the risk. Without identification of risk, you cannot go further for financing. Number two, technical analysis. Whenever a particular project is identified, the analysis needs to take place. We undertake many kinds of analysis, out of which one is technical analysis and another one is feasibility analysis. Whatever business idea we have in mind, if we get the funds, will we be able to make a best use out of it? Will it be practically feasible for us to actually run that project? This is also very important. That if we have adequate resources, either we will be able to generate sufficient profits out of it or not. क्योंकि आप कोई भी बिजनेस सिर्फ टाइम पास के लिए नहीं कर रहे. अगर आप एक बिजनेस में इतना सारा पैसा लगा रहे हैं तो जाहिर सी बात है कि यू नीड प्रॉफिट्स आउट ऑफ इट. सो वेदर द सफिशिएंट प्रॉफिट्स विल बी जनरेटेड फ्रॉम दैट पर्टिकुलर काइंड ऑफ अ प्रोजेक्ट इज समथिंग व्हिच वी नीड टू एनालाइज. नंबर टू, financing stage. After the pre-financing stage, the next stage is financing stage. What happens in the financing stage? In the financing stage, number one, we have to arrange the funds. हमें पैसे अरेंज करने होते हैं. अब ये पैसे हम कहाँ से लाएं, किस सोर्स से लाएं? Whether we should raise equity or we should raise debt or we should use a combination of both is something which we need to determine. Is something which we need to see. Number two, negotiation and syndication. After having finalized the source of finance, which is the most important step, once the project is identified, once the analysis is done, the next step is to negotiate the terms and conditions. This is a skill which we need to master if we have to go upward in the game. We have to negotiate the terms and conditions. If the bank says, let's suppose you go for debt, that we will be offering you the loan at, let's suppose, 10% rate of interest. Are you okay with it? Or you want to try that let's push it down to 8% or maybe 7.5% or maybe 7% at least. So this is the art of negotiation which will come into picture. Number third, commitment and disbursement. After having negotiated the terms and conditions of the loan, the final step is disbursement and commitment. The bank or the financial institution or whosoever the lender is will commit it to arranging the funds and will start dispersing the funds as predetermined in the schedule, right? So this was my pre-financing and my financing stage. Now what about the post-financing stage? After having received the funds, we need to review the repayments, that whether the loan dues or installments are being paid on time or not. This is also a very efficient step. Otherwise, most of the loans turn up becoming unsuccessful NPAs. So it's very important is after having disbursed the loan as a lender, they review the repayments and they also go for monitoring that whether the purpose for which the funds were arranged is actually the funds are utilized in that manner only. For example, you are still lender that I need funds for working capital, but you are using the funds elsewhere. So isn't it a red flag? It is a red flag, and that will be reviewed from time to time, that whether the purpose for which you have raised the funds, are you utilizing the funds in that particular manner only or not. Why we invest so much time in all these three stages? The question which comes to my mind. Because arranging for funds is a very long process. And number two, it is irreversible decision. Once you receive the funds and you start your business, it is almost irreversible. If suddenly you go for a change of mind, sorry, it is not for the chicken hearted. The business or raising funds is for the thick skinned, because it is a long term process and it is totally irreversible. Now let's come to different sources of finance. As I told you, there may be different sources of finance. Number one, equity. Number two, debt or debentures. Number third, loan, banks. Number four, hybrid instruments, means something which combines the features of both the equity and the debt. For example, preference shares. And number fifth, subsidy from government. Many a times, the organizations receive subsidies from government to start their business, which is also a very good way to kickstart your business. Number two, let's discuss the topic of seed capital funding. Whenever you start the business, you must have always heard that she started a business with meager fund of rupees 1 lakh. He started the business with a meager amount of 10,000 rupees. To start the business, initially a lot of capital is not required. To start the business, a minimum amount of capital is required, and that is something which is known as seed capital, right? Seed capital. Let's read what is seed capital. Coming back to our topic, seed funding. Seed capital funding is generally a very minimum amount of capital which is generally given or dispersed by the founders of the business or the project owners. Because for starting a business, let's suppose you only need rupees 10,000, so the project owners or the founders necessarily have certain sum of money, because when they are thinking of business, they may have certain funds with them. So that particular funds which is initially put in the business for starting the business operations is known as seed capital. Okay. Number two, it is very low. The amount of seed capital is generally very low. And number third, it is generally provided by some family member or friends. Many times, suppose you as a budding entrepreneur and you are only 22 years old. So you can ask for your dad or for your mom or from your relatives or any of your siblings that I need certain funds to kickstart my business. And if you are lucky, you may get those funds as well, right? So this is the very first stage of seed capital funding. Number third, a very good dilemma, funding with debt or equity. Debt से funding करें या equity से funding करें, right? If you raise the funds with debt, those people who give you funds are generally known as lenders. If you raise the funds in the form of equity or you raise IPO, those particular people are known as investors. Or you may go for a combination of both. Sometimes when you take excessive debt, it may lead to over-gearing, which may lead to negative flows to the firm. On the other hand, when you raise the funds through IPO, you have to see the credibility. Okay? So generally the business trend these days is to go for a combination of both. You don't go for 100% debt or you don't go for 100% equity. Generally you go for a combination of both, right? So I think this was my topic for today. I hope कि ये topic आपको useful रहा होगा और आपको पसंद आया होगा. And in case you wish to be updated and you like to learn new things, so stay tuned with my channel. Till then,